So it is 3:01, and I am going to start this off for the group. We will start by having a roll call.
Matt Guillory. Jorge Charnico.
Here.
Dylan Bradway. Betsy Brunstetter. Donna Cervantes. Tyler Holmes.
Here.
Lee Peoples.
Here.
Ben Sellers.
Here.
James Varnum.
Here.
You have a quorum.
So next we will try to approve the minutes from the March 23rd meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those?
A motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
Second. Second.
So that motion is so approved. Am I doing it correctly? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. It's the first time. So we will take a vote to approve the minutes from March 23rd. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion's approved unanimously. This round, we don't have any cases that have been withdrawn. We also don't have any continuance request. So we are moving to the consent docket. And does anybody have a request for individual consideration of the item listed below in the agenda? Okay, with that said, do we need to vote or do we just? So we've got we need a motion to approve.
I would move to approve item 5A.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, let's vote on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is approved. We have no cases for individual consideration. We have no other business. We're down to a presentation on neighborhood overlays, and I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Yes, the past year, the planning department has been working on the development of a new overlay zoning. We heard a lot of feedback from some citizens and other stakeholders that they would be interested in some sort of design review protection for their neighborhoods, something maybe not quite as strict as historic preservation, but something that would help them protect the key character-defining elements of their neighborhoods. So Katie Friddle is a senior planner in our office. She's been developing this, and she's going to lead you through this. One reason we're presenting it to you today is that the zoning overlay we've worked really hard to structure it to where it is consists of all administratively approvable items. But in the event something needs more discretion, needs either an appeal or a public hearing, we're proposing that Urban Design Commission be that body. One reason we've proposed that is that UDC already reviews two different ordinances. They review against the UDC sections and the DDRC sections. So there's already some familiarity and flexibility on how to apply different standards to different areas. So Katie's going to present informationally what this entails. I believe Matt's been in on some of the stakeholders.
Yes,
Matt and Betsy.
Matt and Betsy have been on, and George McQuistion when he was still on the committee.
Right. They were involved in some of our stakeholder groups to develop this. We intend to bring it back to you at the May meeting for you to recommend its approval by Planning Commission and onward through the adoption process. But this, we recognize this is the first time you're hearing about it, so I'll ask you to pay attention to Katie and ask any and all questions.
So a little more background. We met staff in the planning department, staff particularly working with the Strong Neighborhood Initiatives program, staff to some of the organizations that are working on redevelopment and revitalization in those neighborhoods, started meeting well over a year ago and talking about the need for some sort of design review process for various neighborhoods around the city, areas, individual properties that are a really important part of the city's character and have a really strong identified character, but that wouldn't necessarily warrant or support designation as a historic district. Maybe they don't have the integrity left for the character of the district, or there's lots of space for new construction in the area still, or just that sense that the owners in the area wouldn't be supportive of that level of designation. So we started looking at tools that other communities already use. A lot of places call them conservation districts, neighborhood conservation districts, architectural conservation districts. That name is already occupied for Oklahoma City by another tool, so we couldn't call it that, but we kind of studied the way that those had been implemented in other cities to make it sort of a step down from these design review districts, HP design review process, but more regulation than just straight base zoning for R1 or R2, something like that. We started meeting, we worked toward developing a draft and kind of figuring out where we wanted to fall on that spectrum of restrictiveness, and started meeting with neighborhood representatives earlier this year. So what we've developed at this point would be an amendment to Chapter 59 of the Planning and Zoning Code to create a new overlay. It would amend the powers of the Urban Design Commission to allow for review not just of urban design overlay areas, but also traditional neighborhood overlay areas, and would also amend the powers to allow Urban Design Commission to make recommendations. Right now, this body can make recommendations on things that happen within urban design overlay districts, and it would just add to that list. So if a neighborhood wanted to be rezoned with this traditional neighborhood overlay, that would come to this body for a recommendation on whether that rezoning was appropriate, would then go to Planning Commission, then to City Council, the way you do now if you get like an SPUD or something like that. So the establishment, the intro to the ordinance amendment establishes the purpose and intent, and this is a lot of text, but just wanted to kind of include our kind of summary statement of the whole purpose, that it's to facilitate continued growth and revitalization of areas that embody unique historic and architectural character or represent development patterns of traditional areas of Oklahoma City, provide oversight and protection for things that could significantly alter character but ensure that development and maintenance can continue to happen with some flexibility. So the procedure would be similar to what a neighborhood or an individual property goes through for any other type of rezoning. It's consistent with established procedures where it would go to this body, then Planning Commission, then City Council. It could be initiated by City Council, a City Council member individually, by Planning Commission, by Urban Design Commission, or a majority of property owners could create their own petition and submit an application to have their neighborhood rezoned to the traditional neighborhood overlay. A certificate of approval would be required only for work that requires a permit. So many changes could be made to a structure within the area that don't require any review at all, just like in a typical residential neighborhood. You could change your windows, change your doors, replace your roof, things like that, maintenance and minor changes to the structure without any kind of review required. The things that would require review are those that require a building permit. So obviously demolition, new construction, additions to a structure, and more major structural modifications to an existing building.
Yeah, Katie, I'll just elaborate a little more. We're not saying that that the type of window doesn't have an effect on the character of a building. Of course it does, but the intent of the overlay is to protect the bones. So we're saying somebody could replace, if they want to replace their windows with vinyl 1/1 windows, they can. That's okay, because if somebody comes back in 10, 20 years and wants to restore the house with, true divided light, wood, 6/1 windows, they can, because the bones of the original facade still exist. But if somebody wanted to enlarge that window or create a door in a window opening, that would start changing the bones, and we would want to be able to review that type of thing.
Yep, absolutely. We talked a lot about kind of the spectrum of what's allowed, and that this needed to be far enough away from Design Review District's HP Commission on that spectrum to be worth doing. That if it was too close to what we already have, then there's not really a point in developing a new tool. But it still needed to be far enough away from zero regulation to also be worth doing, or you're just kind of creating a meaningless task for people to complete as they go through a review process. So we've developed draft design guidelines for existing buildings, new construction, paving, and demolition. Existing buildings makes lots of references to the surrounding block, the surrounding streetscape. We've tried, because we wanted to keep this as much under the administrative review category as possible, we've tried to keep these as black and white as possible, where we reference kind of predominant characteristics within the block. That, for example, if over 60% of the structures on the block have a porch, then your structure should have a porch. With existing buildings, it's largely about keeping the things that are there that are part of the character of the structure and of the surrounding area, and primarily on the street-facing sides of the building and the property. We also called out within this category existing non-traditional buildings, and that was intended to recognize that within any district or any neighborhood or area, you will likely have buildings that don't really add to the character. Maybe you have a neighborhood of 1930s Tudor revival style houses, and on one block there's a 70s ranch style house. To say that that one might not necessarily meet the same requirements and the same criteria that the remaining buildings in the area do. For new construction, again, it's lots of references to the surrounding block, the predominant characteristics of the surrounding block. We also drafted some guidelines to reference when there was nothing comparable in the surrounding block. This was brought up in some of our stakeholder meetings about if a block has very few buildings remaining and someone wanted to build for instance, a commercial building where there had been one historically but no commercial buildings remained in the area, giving some guidance on what the precedents would be for that, what things they should look at for kind of a basis of the design. And this section of the guidelines also addresses accessory structures like garages, carports, and fencing. And those were some things that we heard from our stakeholders were very important to their neighborhoods being interested in something like this, that they felt like those things really impacted the character and should be addressed by the guidelines. Guidelines for paving, similarly to the others, reference the surrounding area within the block and the same side of the street. So just identifying that if there is uniformity there, that should be the basis for changes and for new design. Where there's less uniformity, there's more flexibility. So this is just a block of all matching driveways. And that was one of our stakeholders' big concerns as well, was things like people paving their entire front yards, areas changing from residential to commercial, and putting parking in front of buildings that historically hadn't been there. So finding ways to address that. Then demolition employs the same criteria that was recently adopted for all of the other design review bodies except HP. HPs are slightly different. The only modification that we've made at this point is to reference the municipal code's definition of character rather than the existing design guidelines definition of urban character, because this could very well be applied in a neighborhood that is not particularly urban to begin with. The urban character language talked a lot about street walls and kind of height and density, and said if it's a neighborhood that is more rural in its feel, then that language is not going to be applicable. Next steps are we're going to have a public meeting May 9th for all the design review bodies that are interested and just general public. It'll come back to Urban Design Commission, hopefully May 25th, for you to formally review the draft language and make a recommendation to Planning Commission and City Council. And then we'll start through the various meetings required for Planning Commission and City Council adoption. So hopefully getting to City Council by the end of summer, early fall. I know that was pretty brief. Does anybody have questions about any of that?
I'll recap a few key points. This ordinance is just establishing the overlay. It's not rezoning anybody. It's just putting it in the books so that, like, we know of several neighborhoods who may want to start an initiative to get the overlay, but we're just establishing it. We've also taken great care to, we've called it traditional neighborhoods, and, you know, kind of initially in our minds, you know, we're thinking of, you know, the neighborhoods built in the 20s and the 30s, but we've worked hard to make the guidelines applicable to neighborhoods built in the 50s, neighborhoods built in the 60s, and as we move forward in time, and as even neighborhoods from the 1980s, you know, as they age in time, that these same protections could maintain the cohesiveness of those neighborhoods. So it really could, you know, Urban Design Commission is mostly focused on the core of the city, but I can definitely see this overlay really expanding pretty far west. I'm thinking of some of the neighborhoods around the lake, various neighborhoods on the south side. They could all be find some use in this.
We kept the criteria or the kind of purpose and intent statement very broad with that intent, that there are no specific criteria on age of a neighborhood or historic or architectural significance, really, from the standpoint of that it needs to be on the National Register or things like that. It's really for any area that has kind of a cohesive identity that they want to see retained. And it could be for a small commercial area. You know, it doesn't just have to be a residential neighborhood.
Do we have any other questions? Good. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
So we will move on to the administrative report.
I just had 4 cases that were approved administratively over the past 4 months, or past month, excuse me. Sign some revisions to the project that Jeff Struble did in the Plaza District. Nothing, any particular significance. There's another revision in the Plaza District to some of the buildings on the north half of the block near Indiana. And then a new door and some windows on the north elevation of the building where the Drake is on 23rd. So that pretty much encapsulates all our actions administratively this past month.
Does anyone have any questions? Thank you very much. Next, comments from the Planning Department staff.
Yes, I want to introduce Sharita Bryce with our department. I think I might have been, she's been at several of our other meetings. She's Paula's backup, and today she is running the meeting herself. So she'll be an expert at it, or if we let Paula go on vacation sometime. And today is Administrative Professionals Appreciation Day, so we're grateful for their help. The May meeting, your May meeting, will be held in the conference room of the new Arts District parking garage. So the entrance is off of Main. I think the street address is 431, 433. It's right next to Clarity Coffee. We will remind you in your packet, but just a heads up, don't come here, go there.
Thank you.
One other thing, wish George was still on the commission, but the infamous snow cone stand at 23rd and Robinson has been removed.
Well, welcome. Any comments from commission members? All right, with that said, the next meeting is set for, like Lisa mentioned, May 25th. Check your email for location. And with that, I will adjourn at 3:21. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.